Hello, poison friends. We have been discussing the history of the wellness industry as well as those in it for health versus those in it for wealth. There are some good ideas and some good products within the wellness industry, of course, as we've mentioned, but we're mainly looking into some of the wilder claims and scams that are out there, just preying on people who are looking to better their health or, just physically and mentally. Now, in last week's bonus episode, we talked about Franz Mesmer with his magnetic healing slash animal magnetism. We also talked about Daniel David Palmer. He was the founder of chiropractics via spiritualism. So just some of those that sort of came out of early wellness sort of I don't want to say fads because chiropractors are still a thing, but like where it started from, that kind of thing. Now, this week, I want to talk about a man who many know because of cereal. That's right, we're talking about the history behind Kellogg's cereals, sort of. I mean, it is the history behind the cereal, but we're really talking about the man, the men involved, because there were two, sort of. So, mainly Dr. Kellogg and his brother, but the brand Kellogg lives on, just not in the way Dr. Kellogg probably intended. Now, John Harvey Kellogg was born February 26th in 1852 in Tyrone, Michigan, and he was one of 17 children. It's a lot. He had siblings and half-siblings. The only information I could really find about his siblings, apart from his brother William Kellogg, who will come up again in a moment, was that 6 of them died of some infectious disease within a 9-year period, but this wasn't at a young age when I went to look further, and I couldn't get too much more information. So now disease was just rampant, regardless of what age you were, as were treatments that really didn't help all that much. His dad, John Preston Kellogg, was into several religious revival movements throughout his life, all of them surrounding the Christian religion, but different denominations, including Baptists, Congregational Church, and the Seventh-day Adventists. Now, he and subsequently his family were believers in the imminent return of Jesus Christ, as many in some of those denominations are. And I mention this because since they believed that Jesus was coming back soon, the father did not see it necessary for his children to really get much of an education. So that's why I mention that, because it matters in the sense of John and William, really, and the rest of the children, but we're really just talking about those two. John Jr., therefore, only went to school from the ages of 9 to 11. I guess their dad figured, like, if the world ends, what's the point? I mean, and this can be and is very traumatizing for children. I've known a lot of adults who still deal with internal angst and fear because they were raised to basically be ready for the end of the world at any second. Also, the whole rapture trauma is real for those who grew up with parents who believed and taught that soon all of those who are saved will disappear and go to heaven, while those who aren't will be left behind to deal with the great tribulation. There's even children's books that are based on this, and they are like somewhat fictional accounts, but they're written to basically get children to believe in the rapture, which actually wasn't even a concept until like the 1800s. Like the rapture is not even in the Bible. It was a concept developed in the 1800s by, I think, John Darby. Anyway, yeah. But the word rapture is not even in the Bible, but it was taught a lot, and so here we are, especially amongst the revival groups like this. I've heard so many stories of friends who, when they were kids, panicked because they couldn't find anyone in the house. Like maybe dad went out to get the mail or something, and they were alone in the house for a few minutes, and they couldn't get anybody on the phone, and immediately thought, oh my God, it's happened. I've been left behind. So it's a real thing. It's kind of scary. Now, in 1856, John Preston Kellogg moved the whole family to Battle Creek, Michigan, where other members of the Seventh-day Adventist group had moved. And this is where they basically settled physically and spiritually. There, he opened a broom factory. John Harvey Kellogg, the son, endured illness from a pretty young age, including tuberculosis, which left his left lung pretty useless early on. He also had various gastrointestinal ailments slash painful bowel disorders, which he definitely wasn't the only one dealing with that, especially in that time period. Now, the diet of the area in that time really didn't help these GI symptoms. They were mainly eating grains, fatty meats, fried potatoes. I mean, even like the breakfast of the time was like meats cooked in animal fats and potatoes and starch, and just not a great start to the day, to be honest, for your digestive system. Now, some of the more fortunate out there may say, well, what's wrong with some meat and fried potatoes? Well, apart from just being an unhealthy diet long term overall, when you have GI issues or a bowel disorder, such foods can make symptoms worse. And they didn't know much at all about many of the disorders that we do now, such as celiac disease, Crohn's disease. They knew some had disorders of the gut, with symptoms and such, but not what specifically caused them or how to treat them, like until much later in the 20th century for most. It was also pretty common in America, at least at the time, for people to just have gut and bowel disorders involving constipation, pain, nausea, and the like, because, well, the diet was terrible. Some people were probably still drinking raw milk or water that was not safe. So a lot of things could have been going on, depending on where you lived. When John left school at 11 years old, he was made to organize brooms for his father's business while also doing chores such as milking the cows, making soap, and finding wood for the stove. I can't even get my almost 10-year-old to put her clothes away sometimes, so it's a good bit there. We're working on it. He was a voracious reader, though. He kept up his education that way. He would eventually go to grammar school. And when he was 12, he was working for some friends of the family who just happened to be the co-founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Ellen and James White, who were running a publishing center in their church for periodicals and books, basically concerning the Seventh-day Adventist religion. So they had him setting type and filling inkwells. And obviously the printing back in the day was more complicated. Now, eventually he was involved with the editing and proofreading processes. Doctrine taught there involved the body, mind, and soul being inseparable, and what is done to one affects the others the same. So keeping your body pure meant your spirit would be as well, essentially, just sort of how they believed. Now, caring for your soul meant caring for your health with good hygiene and eating habits. The periodicals coming out of this printing center had such titles as The Health Reformer. Now, this was something that really influenced John, even if his religious beliefs would change over time. Now, he originally wanted to be a teacher from the age of 16. And after some experience teaching at a district school, he actually enrolled into a teaching course at the Michigan State Normal School. His parents and the Whites, those leading the Adventist Church, the founders of the Adventist Church, really wanted him to join this 6-month medical course at Russell Trails Hygiotherapeutic College in Florence Township, New Jersey, with his half-brother Merritt and 2 of the Whites' sons. Now, this was a school that combined hydropathic treatment, which we'll cover in just a little bit, with medicine, 1800s medicine, mind you, as well as natural remedies and vegetarianism. So he did this, and really they were urging him to do this because they wanted to form this Adventist-inspired Western Health Reform Institute, which is a mouthful, but that's what they wanted. They wanted to do this in Battle Creek where they were living, and they wanted to do it with a group of trained doctors that held to their beliefs and I guess who they could trust and all. And since they likely all believed the same way about Jesus returning soon, teaching, I guess, seemed like an unnecessary field to them, sadly. Now, John Jr. did go to University of Michigan Medical School beginning in 1873, then Bellevue Hospital in New York the next year. And all of this was under the Whites' patronage, mind you. It's also important to remember the era because at this time, medical education was lacking and, well, nothing like it is today. Such practices as bleeding and purging and giving of various toxic substances like antimony and arsenic were pretty much still the norm at the time. So, where he attended medical school, his training was on a lot of what we would see as probably the opposite of medicine. Still, John brought together what he was learning there with what he had learned in the Adventist church about caring for the body, mind, and such, using nutrition and hygiene. And he was the first person to really turn wellness, if you will, into a health practice, basically. He began promoting fresh air, exercise, clean water, good sleep habits, personal hygiene, vegetarianism, and spirituality as the way to achieve good health. And he wasn't completely wrong, but he did go on to get quite a few things wrong later, especially philosophically. So do ready yourselves for that later in the episode. He graduated medical school in 1875 and became director of that Adventist Western Health Reform Institute that they wanted to start in 1876. And like a year later, he ended up naming it the Battle Creek Medical Surgical Sanitarium. Now, the Whites' plan of having this whole ministry of Adventist doctors kind of backfired because while John still held to some religious beliefs, he also was very keen on science and medicine, while it was also becoming more and more secularized. Now, he later rejected Christian fundamentalism and the like, denying the concepts of original sin, total depravity, which is it's the Calvinist belief of every human since the fall of man, well, as seen in Abrahamic religions, is born sinful and evil, basically. And there are people who still believe in that principle today. But he rejected that. He also had differing views of Jesus than his Adventist family and old friends had. He still defended God as a whole, as seen in his 1903 publication titled The Living Temple, saying God is the explanation of nature, not a God outside of nature, but in nature, manifesting himself through and in all the objects, movements, and varied phenomena of the universe. So he was constantly trying to reconcile faith with science and medicine, as seen in his beliefs of basically God's presence being within everything. As such, both sides, religion and science, were never consistently happy with him because he was sort of a mix of the two, I guess, which I don't see as entirely problematic with the way he's viewing God himself. But I could see it being problematic if you think of God in such a way as those who believe in total depravity. Like that would be a problem, just because if you think all people are born evil, then and you're also treating them as patients. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Whatever the case, he did develop some seriously messed up ideas, like I said, and beliefs later. So let's just continue and we'll get there. Now, his Adventist peeps started calling him out, saying that he was promoting pantheism, which is less their religion and more the universe is God, God is in everything, but like God in general, not a specific deity like the Adventists would worship. So they even invited him to explain himself at different times, going so far as to say that he holds infidel sentiments, which does him great injustice and also endangers his influence as physician-in-chief of the sanitarium. Ouch. Now, they basically put this sanitarium together and got him his position in a way, so I guess they felt entitled to do that. And in a way, it was kind of this power struggle, if you think about it. These ministers, or whatever they would call themselves, saw themselves as a higher authority than his status as a doctor when it came to running a health facility or whatever. So his backers, if you will, were not happy with him at all at this point, seeing him as too liberal, religiously, and unorthodox entirely. Now, he argued that he was simply restating the ideas of the omnipresence God. So there was this whole just fight back and forth there. Now, the sanitarium, which was still owned by the Adventist Church, was being run by Dr. John Kellogg. It actually caught fire and burned down February 18th, 1902. Now, most everyone made it out okay, but the damages to the building added up to like $300,000 to $400,000 at the time. The Adventists, especially the Whites, did not want the site rebuilt. They were also pretty bitter about the book that John Kellogg had recently put out the year after the burning called The Living Temple, which I quoted from earlier concerning his beliefs. Now, the General Council of Adventists were against printing it, so he had it privately printed. Strangely enough, the place it was being printed actually caught fire as well. It was, but it finally made it out into the world, and Mrs. White labeled it as heresy and said that the burning of the sanitarium was God's cleansing sword of fire over the increasingly worldly and business-oriented Battle Creek, which is pretty intense. Anyway, she apparently wrote to him stating not to rebuild the place. He says he never got the message, and since the board of directors were behind the decision to rebuild it, they rebuilt it. It was bigger this time. It was 6 stories high, made of brick with 3 wings jutting out behind it, including a solarium and palm court. In total, it cost about $700,000 to rebuild. Now, the facility became a famous haven for many well-known people of the day, including former President William Howard Taft, Percy Granger, who was a famous pianist at the time, Amelia Earhart, the famous aviator, Irving Fisher, who was this economist, George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, Henry Ford of Ford Motors, Thomas Edison. We're going to have an episode of Edison and Nikola Tesla eventually, so that's going to be fun. Sojourner Truth and Sarah Bernhardt, who was a famous actress of her day. Sojourner Truth was a civil rights activist and abolitionist, and I mentioned Sarah Bernhardt as an actress. I have no idea what she was in, so this was ages ago. Now, by 1907, Dr. John Kellogg was disfellowshipped from the Adventist Church, and there was this whole split with the denomination, because of it, apparently. He continued to lead the sanitarium, however, as well as the American Medical Missionary College, and held to many Adventist beliefs, especially concerning health. So let's kind of discuss how these beliefs affected his practice at the sanitarium. Now, I don't know all that much about the Adventist religion today or if anything has changed. I know, obviously there was that split that happened with him being disfellowshipped. So do forgive me if I mistake anyone's beliefs. This is simply to explain why the sanitarium was run the way that it was. So it's based on pretty much what he believed, okay? So he believed in sticking to a vegetarian diet, abstaining from alcohol and tobacco, and apparently he was taught this idea that sticking to a bland diet would keep people from lust and sexual stuffs. We're going to go over that a little bit later. Mainly such activities as what he called the solitary vice or the vile practice. He was talking about masturbation, but just so you know. This solitary vice was believed by Kellogg to lead to poor digestion, memory loss, impaired vision, heart disease, epilepsy, and insanity, among other issues. None of that is true, just in case you were told any of that as teenagers or whenever. But more on this subject later because it does get dark, okay? He had kind of an obsession with curing this solitary vice, as he called it. Now, before we get on the topic of cereal, which made the family famous long term, John was already doing pretty well for himself before the cereal. So let's go over some common treatments that he provided at this facility. Chewing, which, of course, chewing is important and obviously necessary to digest a typical diet. But before him, there was a man so obsessed with chewing in the late 19th and early 20th century that he was often called the Great Masticator. It's an interesting nickname. His real name was Horace Fletcher, and his chewing method was often called Fletcherism. Now, according to Mr. Fletcher, chewing until the food was basically liquefied was the way to end such symptoms or illnesses as dyspepsia, which, I can see if you're eating too fast, chewing better is good. But also he believed it would cure anemia, obesity, alcoholism, appendicitis, colitis, and insanity. They really wanted to treat insanity quite a bit, which honestly was their word for anything that they deemed either socially incorrect or just didn't like hysteria or having a mental health disorder, that kind of thing. Also, you could, a husband could just say that his wife had insanity and they would just believe him. So awesome. Now, all that chewing might drive some insane. If you ask me, I particularly hate the sound of chewing myself, but he even had a saying: nature will castigate those who don't masticate. It's kind of cheesy, not gonna lie. Even liquids had to be chewed so the saliva could like mix with it properly. Like, how does one chew a liquid? Now, this guy was also super into human excrement. Okay, not like that, but it is still weird. I mean, GI specialists like literally make their living asking patients about such things, but this guy was pretty strange about it. He called it digestive ash. He taught people that it was pretty much a good indicator of health. Now, that's not completely wrong, but he believed that if you ate correctly, which according to him, and actually Kellogg as well, a low protein diet with lots of chewing up front, then your excrement would be inoffensive, meaning that it should not smell bad. So there's that. So his way to reach an ideal life of health took 3 steps. Eat only when you have a good appetite. Chew food to pulp, then drink that pulp. Do not swallow food. So, like, I guess he's saying don't swallow food until it's liquid food. Drink all liquids and liquefied foods sip by sip, no gulping. So how many times do you need to chew? According to him, 40 to 100 times, or until the food basically had no flavor left. Now, obviously, there were the fad chasers, and this guy was and has since been labeled by actual doctors as a quack and food faddist. Obviously, no scientific evidence has ever backed up his claims. John Kellogg, however, was a huge fan and even led his patients within the sanitarium in this chew song. And I'm going to sing it for you now. Chew, chew, chew. That is the thing to do. I don't know if that's the melody. I just made that up. Maybe it was chew, chew, chew. That is the thing to do. It sounds like I'm trying to be a train on a kid's show. Anyway, he would do this as they dined. That had to be annoying. Electric light bathing was another treatment of theirs. Now, this is kind of what it sounds like. Instead of sunbathing, you lie under electric lights. Relatively new technology, really. And this would reportedly cure you of a range of ailments, including diabetes, insomnia, gangrene, syphilis, and writer's cramp. You know, for the famous writers coming to visit the place. I'm guessing that's why George Bernard Shaw came in. Now, there has been some support of bright light therapy with like depression, mental illness, that sort of thing, mood disorders. But we also know it's not a cure for the other issues I mentioned, and you have to be careful about things like UV radiation, that sort of thing. Sinusoidal current was another treatment. John Kellogg found other uses for electricity as well, including sending low amounts of electric current to a patient's skin, which he claimed cured lead poisoning, tuberculosis, obesity, and, when applied directly to the patient's eyeballs, a variety of vision disorders. No, just no. He also experimented with using electric current to stimulate muscles in less mobile patients who needed exercise, thinking that it would like build muscle for them. And now, you know, obviously we still have like electric shock therapy for like that. It's still used. It's not as common, obviously, but for mood disorders and such. Bathing. So yes, bathing and hygiene. Love it. You know, good healthy practice, keeps you clean, keeps away the baddies that try to invade our bodies. Now, Kellogg claimed to offer 46 types of baths, some pretty normal, but then others like a continuous bath were also a thing. Now, these baths could last hours, days, even weeks, with the patient only really getting out to go to the bathroom. And apparently they were supposed to treat skin diseases, chronic diarrhea. That doesn't sound great in a bathtub, and a host of mental maladies, including delirium, hysteria, and mania. So we just need to do like a whole bonus episode of what they would have considered like criteria for madness, insanity, hysteria, those types of things. What would get you thrown into a facility at that point. Reading. Now, there was also the electric horse and vibrating chair. Now, President Calvin Coolidge apparently had an electric horse made by Kellogg in the White House, and one was in the gym on the Titanic, reportedly, as well. I'm not going down there to look, so sure. Now, this contraption is exactly what it sounds like, the electric horse. It's a saddled machine that is supposed to imitate riding a horse for exercise. And apparently, Calvin Coolidge did it like 3 times a day for his exercise. There was also a mechanical camel, if you liked a different sort of motion. Now, the vibrating chair was also what it sounds like, and it was jarring enough to cure constipation as well as headaches and back pain, apparently, which seems ironic because I would think that would cause headaches and back pain, but here we are. And there was also a vibrating dumbbell for exercising the arms, and I'm pretty sure they still try to sell a similar product on TikTok Shop. Maybe not called that, but the percussion machine. This was a mechanical device with 2 arms wrapped in leather that would basically punch a patient's stomach, essentially to loosen fatty tissue. That sounds not fun. He also developed this machine that massaged the buttocks to build muscle and help constipation. He was kind of obsessed with constipation, apparently. I mean, there's probably a lot of it going on, too, with that diet that many were eating. The oscillo manipulator. That sounds fun. Now, you've probably seen this in old-timey shows or movies or documentaries even. It's the device where a patient stands with this belt around them, like around here, and it like oscillates, sort of shaking your midsection back and forth. Now, this was supposed to alleviate high blood pressure and, again, constipation. So the place also had this experimental kitchen, and Dr. Kellogg made his own version of peanut butter. He apparently loved nuts and saw them as the answer for any food shortage problem, you know. He also developed a meat alternative that he named Protos, using wheat, gluten, peanut butter, and cereal somehow. He was going more for texture than taste, but now his wife, Ella Eaton Kellogg, that's interesting. Anyway, helped there by writing a cookbook on vegetarian meals and teaching patients how to live basically this sort of lifestyle. John had no problem with germ theory, but he developed his own theory of sorts as well, and basically saying that the main reason people became ill was because of a disruption in the microflora of the gut. Now, he explained that there were good and bad microbes in the gut, and that the bad ones produced toxins during digestion, which poisoned the blood and spread to the rest of the body. So, according to him, healthy eating caused better health. And now, a lot of these ideas do sound good, mainly the idea of flora in the gut. We know that's a thing. And there is good bacteria in there helping you with digestion, and then bad bacteria that can make you sick can take over, especially with long-term like antibiotic usage, or the bad bacteria outnumber the good bacteria and end up being a problem too. So, but he pushed a diet that consisted of low protein, high fiber, and laxatives. So I mentioned that growing up Adventist, he was made to abstain from alcohol and tobacco. So these were also practices that he preached. He also taught the abstinence from caffeine and sex. And he would mention that, he was celibate himself, even though he'd been married for like 4 decades. He also mixed this with ideas of purging as well, promoting enema machines. And these would pump 15 quarts of water per minute into the patient's bowels to cleanse them. And then he would have them undergo an insertion of beneficial microbes via the eating and enema insertion of yogurt. So, I mean, yogurt's good for you when you eat it, but he was like also creating yogurt enemas. Now, other treatments involved easier practices such as marching around meal times for exercise and deep breathing. Water was a big treatment consideration, but maybe not in the way you would think. Drinking water often is necessary and great. John wrote a book in 1876 called The Uses of Water in Health and Disease. He studied hydropathy while in college and med school. We mentioned that alongside other interesting cures, I am sure. But this Hydropathy is essentially the treatment of illness through the use of water, internally or externally. So drinking water, but also various sorts of baths and using lots of it in cleaning out the bowels, which he seemed obsessed with, if we're honest. Now, it highlights the physical attributes of water as well as temperature and pressure involvement with healing of various ailments. Now, water can be very useful in physical or occupational therapies, exercise, or just treating some symptoms. But John Kellogg did have some misunderstandings of the properties of water in general, as I'm sure many did. To his credit, some things he got right included water can lower or raise body temperature pretty easily depending on its temperature. We know the symptomatic benefits of a warm, hot bath, basically. And we've seen athletes who go for the more polar plunge baths to ease muscle pains. I could never. I hate the cold. But cold water is also supposed to help ease anxiety quickly. Oh, y'all tell me because I'm too scared to try it. Now, he observed its ability to affect heart rate as well, noting that a cold bath could lower one's pulse by 20 to 40 beats per minute relatively quickly. Of course, he went further and said that water was a perfect sedative, better than the drugs used for such, though at the time, those drugs were probably pretty rough on the systems. A hot bath, he noticed, raised the heart rate. He stated that water could be used as a pain reliever, and in some ways, it can. Cold water for numbing, warm water for aches and pains, because it essentially puts heat on those muscles. And of course, he liked to say that it can function as the most perfect eliminative, because as he saw it, water can dissolve waste and foreign matter from the blood. Now he did criticize those who overused water as a remedy, so I guess there was a fine line there somewhere. Now water is great, but it's not a cure-all as he often overstated it to be. You need water, but he kind of considered it this sort of like if nothing else, water is going to cure it in some way. So let's talk about his younger brother, William Kellogg, for a moment because he plays a big role in the rest of the story as well. Now, William was born in 1860 when John would have been 8 years old. William's childhood was pretty sad, to be honest. His father, again, didn't think education was important, saw no sense in him learning to read even, and his mother was described as cold and distant. I mean, with all those kids, oh Lord. And like that husband, like, I mean, we don't know, you know, sucks that she felt distant and cold. Now, John also reportedly bullied him a lot. By the age of 6, his father had William working all day in his broom factory every day, apart from the Sabbath. And he started working for his brother at the sanitarium in 1880. And this is about 4 to 5 years after John became the director there. Soon, William was running the publishing house for John's books, managing the family health food company eventually, and acting as administrator of the sanitarium, which was these are huge jobs for one person. William reportedly worked 120 hours a week for hardly any pay. John was not very kind to his brother and had no problem working him like he was basically his personal servant. Apparently, a common sight on the sanitarium campus was Dr. John on his bicycle, pedaling from building to building, dictating his thoughts as William frantically just kept up on foot so that he could record said thoughts. I think I read too that John would make William follow him into the bathroom to take notes while he was doing his business, dude. Basically, William had a strong work ethic and likely a need to please, and John probably others walked all over him for a while. Both men were quite inventive, though John enjoyed taking credit for all the things. John reportedly created foods and recipes for this bland diet, again, to stop excitement and sexual arousal and the solitary vice, if you will. And this isn't too far out there when you think about how there are foods that are labeled as aphrodisiacs. Like there have been long considered foods that cause this or cause that or make you think this, make you think that. Personally, I think it's mostly placebo and a little bit of chemistry, but mostly placebo. Now, a lot of his foods / recipes were easy for digestion, being ground or soft, easy to chew as well, which makes sense, with him being kind of into the chewing guy, right? It was in 1877 that he started working on cereals. Now, the rest of the story was actually debated by the brothers and also Ella, John's wife, who would, of course, take the side of her husband, and food historians as well. So, in one story, John just takes all the credit for creating granola and Granose Flakes, which was the first Flake cereal to be sold. Granola, not the granola we know today, just his name for this, was a product of basically a dough that he and his wife and brother likely created from wheat, oats, and corn, and then baked at high temperatures and then just broke into pieces. This he intended to sell under the name Granula, but the name was already spoken for, and to avoid legal concerns, he renamed it Granola. So that's, yeah. Now, he reportedly made granose flakes by boiling wheat, then putting it through a pasta machine for flattening. According to William, when it comes to granose flakes, he was asked by John to create a bread substitute and something that would compete with shredded wheat, which was just taking off apparently. And he spent hours on the project and gave up one night, leaving out some of the wheat dough being used. The next morning, after it had been sitting, William ran it through the pasta machine to flatten it, just kind of on a whim to see what would happen. And he found that the result was actually like the perfect texture and it tasted good when baked. So those are the two stories. Whatever the case, these flakes gained popularity at the sanitarium. Then outside of it, especially once John made William create this mail order system for it, John then decided to create his own food company called Sanitas Food Company, which his brother managed pretty much. A patent for flaked cereals and process of preparing same was filed on May 31st, 1895, and issued on April 14th, 1896 to John Harvey Kellogg. Significantly, the patent applied to a variety types of grains, not just to wheat, but John Harvey Kellogg was the only person named on the patent. Like, thanks, bro. So not his wife, not his brother whatsoever, even though they had helped. Like, the brothers had already been at odds with each other, so this was just another blow. They continued to experiment with the flakes, eventually made granulose biscuits as well. It was William's idea to make the cereal using corn instead of wheat because it was cheaper and it tasted better. William was honestly as concerned with the taste as of their product as he was with anything else surrounding it, and he suggested that they put sugar into the mix. Well, John was having none of it because he was against sugar. Because, apparently causes lustful thoughts. John's intent was to provide bland food because to him, this is what would lead to good health and a good life. And yeah, it would cure the solitary vice problem. I mean, everyone has different tastes and priorities, but these two could not get along. So done with being pushed around, William started his own food business in 1906, and he called it the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company, which would later become the Kellogg Company. The brothers actually fought for years to use the family name for their company and products, and while Dr. John Kellogg was more famous for his doctor status, sort of celebrity med spa status, whatever, he knew plenty of celebrities and politicians. William had been the main administrator of the sanitarium for like 25 plus years before leaving it in his 40s to start his own company. He was much better at running a business, marketing, using electricity and technology in these factories, etc. All around, he was just more experienced after having been basically running John's business for him. William had spent millions of dollars on advertising with the name already, and he ended up winning the rights to it, mainly because he was able to simply explain that John's original product was a health food made with wheat, listed as a health food. And his was a commercial cereal made of corn. So he was like, well, it's different, So he starts his own food business and makes the cornflakes with sugar, and it, of course, becomes huge. Sugar is pretty addictive itself, and it just makes things taste better. William started adding promotions as well that went to the early 1900s version of viral, such as offering a free box of cereal to women who winked at their grocers. Now, this is definitely something his brother would have been against. Not the lustful thoughts. Now, he also added a prize for those who bought 2 boxes of cereal. It was the same prize each time, but, it's just little moving pictures booklet, but it was still something, right? More than you get out of a box of cereal today. Do y'all remember prizes in cereal? Or like the original, like Happy Meal prizes? They were so much better than they are today. So William and his company later came out with Rice Krispies, and boom, cereal enterprise made, basically. Now, these two fought outside the court as well. John came up with a cereal called Sterilized Bran, which doesn't sound great. It was considered similar to cornflakes, and his advertising basically warned of imitators, like cornflakes. So William hit back with several other cereals to compete with. They also had another competitor as well in Charles W. Post, whose name you've likely also seen on cereal boxes. Post. Yeah. This dude actually frequented Dr. John's sanitarium for a bit until he sought treatment with a group of Christian Scientists whom he had a better experience with, apparently. I do not have the time to go into a whole other religious denomination, but that was this guy's vibe. Anyway, he also settled in Battle Creek, opened his own sanitarium called the Levita Inn in March 1892, and he also founded his own dry foods company called Post Holdings. I don't know why this trend of religion in Battle Creek, Michigan to sanitarium to food company was so big, but here we are. It was the trend, I guess. So the end of the story is actually quite sad. John did feel remorseful for the way he treated his brother later in his life, and he wrote him a letter apologizing and telling him that he wanted to reconcile. The letter basically said, "I am sure you are right in regards to the good business. I earnestly desire to make amends for any wrong or injustice of any sort I have done to you." So he gave it to his secretary to send to his brother, but she believed his apology to be beneath him and filed it away for 2 years instead. Just sounds psycho of this lady, but okay. So John passed away in 1943, believing his brother had received his letter and just didn't want to respond when he never received it in the first place. After his death, the letter was found, and William did get it in 1948, and it was read to him by a nurse because he was blind with glaucoma issues at that time. John Harvey Kellogg was actually inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2006 for the discovery of tempering and the invention of the first dry flaked breakfast cereal, which transformed the typical American breakfast. So, yeah, there's that. Now, that's all very sad, with the brothers, but we need to discuss Dr. John Kellogg's issues later in life because one cannot just ignore such things. We're not going to do what a lot of history books have done, where they just neglect to mention certain things. So I mentioned here and there about some dark aspects of Dr. John Kellogg and his views on wellness and other issues. He, along with those who raised him, apparently were so obsessed with that solitary vice, masturbation, that he wrote of possible ways to cure boys of what he called self-abuse, like in any way. Some of these cures involved tying their hands, bandaging the offending organ, or putting a cage over it. If that didn't work, he recommended circumcision without anesthetic, as the brief pain attending the operation will have a salutary effect upon the mind, as he wrote in his book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, which was published in 1877. You can actually find a PDF form of this book online, and it is something. He says some wild stuff. He even had more gruesome set of treatment for girls, including the application of pure carbolic acid in a certain area or direct mutilation of said area. Now, I don't know if kids are watching, so I'm trying to not be super graphic or anything like that. So I told you it gets dark. Now, Dr. John also got into such ideas as eugenics and genetic purity and, well, racism, because that kind of all goes together. I will dig into the meat of eugenics just before we cover some of humanity's worst crimes and experiments in future episodes, like those on the doctors of the Holocaust during World War II, or those involved in Unit 731 in Japan, etc. So for now, let's hit the basics, in case there are people out there who don't know what they are. The eugenics movement began in England in the 19th century, though ideas and writings for it go back to ancient times. I mean, the building blocks were long there. Essentially, for this episode, Charles Darwin, writer of On the Origin of the Species, and other writings based on his work for the theory of evolution and principles of such, including like natural selection, that guy, okay, he had a cousin named Sir Francis Galton, who looked at natural selection and said, you know what? Let's get crazy. human characteristics such as intelligence are inheritable, and we can totally improve on these traits with selective breeding. Anyway, he wrote all about this idea in his 1883 book, Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development. So I guess, he had to write a book too because his cousin wrote a book and he was just going to take this idea and run with it, even though it's definitely a twisted form of the idea. So the idea of evolution and natural selection just got pretty dark pretty quick because people started thinking, how can we get rid of human traits we do not like? Or how can we get rid of the people we hate / don't understand? Of course, Darwin's survival of the fittest idea, as well as Greg Mendel's work on genetics. I believe he was the pea guy. He did the work with the pea plants. If you remember high school, I don't know why I'm doing this, but pea plants. That's when you guys did the little Mendel boxes, the Mendel squares. They still call that? Remember that? But these were also twisted to explain why some races or groups of people were better than others and to promote segregation and other forms of discrimination, racism, that. And at first it was to rid the world of what they called the feeble-minded. Already dark enough, but the idea would grow to include different races, as I mentioned, and cultures and the like that were deemed unacceptable to those with power and authority. So like mean white dudes with Habsburg chins and generational wealth, if you will. Now, a lot of this probably sounds reminiscent of Nazi Germany and Hitler. However, eugenics was pretty popular in America before Hitler, grabbed onto it. So let's not forget that one of Hitler's heroes was American car dude Henry Ford, who was an anti-Semite, and he was super into eugenics himself. In fact, the Ford Foundation, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, both helped fund America's eugenics movement, which started in the late 1800s and really got moving in the early 1900s, especially the 1920s. It was pretty big then, too. Now, it began with the idea of not allowing undesirables to marry or to breed, as they said. Now, essentially, this referred to those with disabilities and of other races to some degree. There was literally an American Breeders Association by 1903, joined by such notable figures as Alexander Graham Bell, telephone dude, and the first president of Stanford, David Starr Jordan. In 1907, Indiana became the first state to pass a compulsory sterilization law for criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists. Now, I don't have to tell you that they can just literally call people they don't like idiots, imbeciles, criminals, that sort of thing. So also the terminology is terrible. I know. I'm sorry. That's why I'm doing this. So you know that I didn't come up with this. I didn't do it. Okay. I did not say it. Now, other states followed suit until at one point, 33 states permitted involuntary sterilization of those deemed undesirable for procreation. So basically they were telling people who to marry, who not to marry. Even Kellogg, his book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, that book, yeah, he actually mentions a whole list of who you shouldn't marry and who shouldn't marry together and who shouldn't have children together. It's pretty awful. Awful stuff. In 1927, when the constitutionality of these laws were called into question, the Supreme Court upheld state compulsory sterilization laws, which is actually a ruling that is yet to be expressly overturned. So, I'm just saying. As a result, between 1907 and 1963, more than 64,000 people were involuntarily sterilized under U.S. eugenic legislation. In 1911, Dr. John Kellogg established the Race Betterment Foundation. Later, biologist Charles Davenport, funded by the Carnegie Institution and Harriman Railroads, created the Eugenics Record Office. In Michigan, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was a leader of the eugenics movement, perceiving it as the only way to save society from disaster. To promote this, John Kellogg organized the first national conference on race betterment, which was held from January 8th to the 12th, 1913, at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which included more than 400 eugenics experts from across the country. Now, the event held these mental and physical perfection tests, where children and babies were basically just given tests and evaluations for rankings. Like there was a contest, and the winners actually received medals. I'm telling you, it's dark. This event was in the newspapers. Thousands attended. Kellogg also wrote a paper titled "Needed: A New Human Race," where he encouraged all people to become involved in eugenics. His views and support of the movement definitely impacted the education given in Michigan at the time. Colleges began to offer or even require eugenics courses for students. Battle Creek College defined race betterment through eugenics as the primary and essential job of the college. And all students and staff were expected to support and promote it. Now, while I mentioned Indiana was the first to pass a sterilization law, Michigan was actually the first to consider it in 1897. The law there was actually passed in 1923. So it escalated rather quickly. For so dark a philosophy, and such laws and ideas created a culture of competition between races, those differing in intelligence and ability, those with mental health disorders. It got gross so fast. There were even contests, like I mentioned, for families outside of that conference. Like they were called Better Babies and Fitter Families. Just these contests that you could. Such nonsense, of course, extended to those involved in this movement going after immigration restrictions, with eugenicist Harry Laughlin serving as expert advisor to the House Committee on Immigration, warning Congress of the entrance of inferior stock into American society. In the 1920s, selective breeding through eugenics became an American craze, really. I mean, and a lot of it was based on this concept of what they would have called race suicide. And so, like, this is something that you still hear today from racist people. Okay. So the theory they used basically to hold on to eugenics basically said that the middle and upper class white people, who they perceived superior as the superior race, were being outbred by all other races and would die out if action was not taken. And I find this darkly kind of funny because they base their whole thing off of like survival of the fittest. So like, okay, if what you say is true and your race dies out, then you weren't the fittest, were you? Like, I mean, I'm just saying, like, what makes you think you're superior? Anyway, so I mean, that's something you still hear today, said by racists, white nationalists, people who would say they're not into eugenics, probably don't even know what eugenics means, probably can't even spell eugenics, but they're definitely there. It's just definitely there. Now, this resulted in such laws as the Immigration Act of 1924, effectively banning all immigration from Asian countries. Later, some policymakers felt that a fault of the act was that it did not extend to other countries they didn't like, and so it allowed undesirable immigrants from Mexico, Central, and South America. If any of this sounds familiar, like I said, it should. Prejudice, racism, and discrimination of various groups have it's long been around, but eugenics definitely gave society allowances and entitlement to practices such openly, just hidden only behind pseudoscience that they said supported it. The movement technically ended, or officially ended, only because no one wanted to be associated with Hitler. And when I say ended, I mean like the craze sort of quieted down, right? Because they considered like Hitler, they were like, oh, well, Hitler took it too far. We don't want to be associated with him. He is a war criminal. We're not with him, even though like you literally had the same thinking process. Anyway, others were definitely thinking the same kind of stuff. So I just, it's definitely an example of a nation downplaying its own horrible actions and beliefs in light of a worse situation. Madison Grant, who was a prominent American eugenics supporter, he actually got a letter from Hitler in which Hitler proclaimed Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, to be his Bible. So that should tell you something. Like, I mean, if Hitler thinks like your work is like amazeballs, like it's probably not a good sign. Probably not a good sign. I mean, it should have been an eye-opening moment, maybe. Who knows? I mean, some never learn, unfortunately, and instead of the saying history repeats itself, I like to think it's more along the lines of people who don't learn from history repeat its atrocities. Admitting we were wrong in how we thought or what we did is not saying that we in this generation think or do the same thing. Like, so many people are like, "Well, you can't teach that because it shames people." That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. We should teach it because in order to avoid it happening again, we should teach it and see how horrible people were to each other so that we can say, "You know what? Let's not do that again." Not that, you should want to anyway, but you get me. What it's saying is we're going to be intentional to never do that again. So here is to learning. Here's to learning. And I will see you all in our next regular episode, which won't be as dark. It'll be crazy still, but not as dark. I promise. I promise. I shouldn't make promises. Okay. Thank you. We'll see you soon.